At my sister's wedding, the groom called her by my name. I stood up and said something that destroyed his life. Hi everyone. Before we get into today's video, I need your help. We've noticed that the channel's reach has been dropping a bit, and one of the best ways you can support us is by subscribing. It's quick, free, and helps us keep bringing you new and interesting stories. Your support means the world to us, and together we can grow this channel. Thank you so much. Now let's get to today's story. I'm writing from a temporary account for obvious reasons, and I've changed some details to protect my anonymity. I should have known this day would come eventually. Standing in the bridal suite of the Rosewood Manor, watching my sister Emma adjust her veil for the 100th time, I felt that familiar knot in my stomach tighten like a fist. The late afternoon sun streamed through the tall windows, casting golden light across her ivory silk dress, making her look like something out of a fairy tale. She always did have that effect, turning ordinary moments into something magical, effortlessly becoming the center of everyone's universe. "Clara, can you fix this curl?" Emma's voice was pitched with that particular note of barely contained excitement that had defined her since childhood. Her reflection in the antique mirror beamed back at us both, and for a moment I saw us as we used to be, two little girls playing dress-up in our mother's closet, Emma always the princess, me always the loyal lady-in-waiting. My hands moved automatically, smoothing the rebellious strand of her honey-blonde hair. In the mirror, my own face looked pale against the deep burgundy of my maid of honor dress, a color Emma had chosen because it complemented her complexion beautifully. Everything in Emma's world had always been curated to make her shine brighter. "There," I said softly, stepping back. "Perfect." She turned to face me, her blue eyes sparkling with tears of joy. "Clara, I can't believe this is actually happening. I'm marrying David. Can you believe it?" The name hit me like it always did, a sharp intake of breath that I'd learned to disguise over the past 3 years. David. The man whose name she spoke with such reverence, such ownership, such complete and blissful ignorance of what had come before. "It's wonderful," I managed, and hated how easily the lie rolled off my tongue. 3 years of practice had made me an expert at swallowing the truth. Emma grabbed my hands, her engagement ring, a massive princess-cut diamond that caught the light like captured starfire pressing cold against my fingers. "I know we haven't always been close lately," she said, and something in her voice made me look up. "But having you here today as my maid of honor, it means everything to me. You're my sister, Clara. My only sister. I love you so much." The words should have warmed me. Instead, they felt like salt in a wound that had never properly healed. Because I loved her too, that was the problem. I had always loved her, even when loving her meant erasing myself, even when it meant watching her live the life that might have been mine. "I love you too," I whispered, because it was true, and because the truth was often the most complicated burden of all. A knock at the door interrupted us. "Ladies, it's time," came the wedding coordinator's sing-song voice. "The ceremony begins in 10 minutes. Emma squeezed my hands one more time before releasing them to gather her bouquet white roses and baby's breath, classic and elegant, just like everything else about her. I picked up my own smaller bouquet, burgundy roses that matched my dress, and followed her toward the door. But as we walked down the hallway toward the main staircase, my mind drifted backward, pulled by the gravitational force of memory into that night 4 years ago when everything changed. I had never been to a gallery opening before, certainly not one in Manhattan, but my college roommate Maya had dragged me along, insisting that I needed to expand my cultural horizons and stop hiding behind my books. The space was all white walls and polished concrete floors, filled with abstract paintings that made me feel slightly dizzy, and wine that tasted like it cost more than my textbooks. I was standing in front of a particularly bewildering canvas, something that looked like a tornado made of blue and silver paint when he appeared beside me. "It's supposed to represent the chaos of human emotion," said a voice, warm and slightly amused. Though personally, I think it looks like someone spilled paint and decided to call it art. I turned, expecting to see another college student, and instead found myself looking up into the most remarkable pair of green eyes I'd ever seen. He was tall, probably 6'2", with dark hair that looked like he'd run his fingers through it and a smile that seemed to hold secrets. "That's either very insightful or completely blasphemous," I said, surprised by my own boldness. I was usually the girl who listened to conversations rather than participating in them. "Why not both?" He extended his hand. "I'm David, by the way. David Morrison." "Clara," I said, accepting his handshake. His palm was warm, calloused in a way that suggested he worked with his hands. "Clara Hartwell." "So, Clara Hartwell, what brings you to this temple of pretentious art appreciation?" I laughed, despite myself. "My roommate thinks I'm too much of a hermit. She's probably right. What about you?" Client meeting ran late, and I found myself with a free evening in the city. Figured I'd see what all the fuss was about. He gestured toward the painting, still not entirely convinced it's worth the fuss. We talked for 2 hours, about art, about books, about the way the city looked from the gallery's floor-to-ceiling windows. He told me he was an architect, that he designed houses for people who had more money than they knew what to do with, but still somehow never felt like they had enough. I told him about my literature studies, about how I believed stories could change people if they were brave enough to really listen. "You know," he said as the evening wound down, "I've never met anyone who could make literary theory sound like poetry." "Is that a good thing?" I asked. "It's a dangerous thing," he said, and something in his voice made my breath catch. He asked for my number. I gave it to him, writing it on a napkin because I didn't have business cards, because girls like me didn't expect to need them. We had coffee 3 days later. Dinner the following week. He kissed me on the steps of the library after our 4th date, and I felt like I was finally the protagonist of my own story instead of a supporting character in everyone else's. For 6 weeks, I lived in a bubble of possibility. David would text me good morning every day, send me photos of buildings he thought I'd find interesting, call me on his way home from work just to hear my voice. We talked about books and buildings and dreams, about the way light changed throughout the day, and why certain songs could make you cry. "You see things differently," he told me one evening as we walked through Central Park. "It's like you notice the world in a way most people miss." "Maybe most people are just distracted by shinier things," I said. "Maybe," he agreed, and stopped walking to turn and look at me. "Clara, But he never finished that sentence. Because that was the night Maya decided to throw an impromptu party in our dorm room, and that was the night David met Emma. The memory shattered as we reached the top of the staircase. Below us, the main hall of Rosewood Manor stretched out like a scene from a dream. White chairs arranged in perfect rows, an aisle scattered with rose petals leading to an altar draped in flowing fabric and surrounded by towers of white flowers. The string quartet was playing Pachelbel's canon, and the soft murmur of 200 guests created a symphony of anticipation. Emma paused at the top of the stairs, her hand gripping the banister. "Oh God, Clara, look at all those people. They're all here for you," I said, and meant it. Emma had always had the gift of making people fall in love with her, not just romantically, but wholly, completely. She collected hearts the way other people collected stamps, without even trying, simply by being herself. Our parents were already seated in the front row. Dad looked distinguished in his black tuxedo, his silver hair perfectly combed, while Mom dabbed at her eyes with a lace handkerchief. They both beamed as they saw Emma, their faces radiating the particular pride that parents reserve for their golden child. They had always been proud of me, too, in their way. Proud of my grades, my scholarship to Columbia, my quiet accomplishments. But it was the difference between applause and adoration, between appreciation and awe. Emma didn't just succeed, she dazzled. And I had learned long ago that there was only room for one star in any family constellation. The coordinator appeared again, clipboard in hand. "Miss Emma, we're ready for you. Miss Clara, you'll go first, remember? Nice and slow, count to 3 between each step." I nodded, taking my place at the top of the aisle. The string quartet transitioned into the processional music, and I began my walk toward the altar. Each step felt weighted with history, with all the words I'd never said and all the truths I'd never told. The faces in the congregation blurred together, college friends, family friends, cousins I hadn't seen in years, David's colleagues and fraternity brothers. All of them here to witness what they believed was a perfect love story. The beautiful, vivacious Emma and her handsome, successful fiancé. A fairy tale wedding for a fairy tale couple. But as I walked, my eyes found David at the altar, and the careful composure I'd built over 3 years threatened to crack. He looked exactly as he had that first night at the gallery, tall and confident, his dark hair slightly tousled, those green eyes that had once looked at me like I was the most fascinating person in the world. He wore a black tuxedo that fit him perfectly, a white rose boutonniere on his lapel, and an expression of nervous anticipation that made my chest ache. For just a moment, our eyes met across the length of the aisle. Something flickered in his gaze. Recognition, memory, perhaps even regret. But then he looked away, toward the back of the room where Emma would appear, and I remembered my place in this story. I reached the altar and took my position to the left, turning to watch my sister make her entrance. The music swelled into the bridal march, and every head in the room turned toward the back of the aisle. Even knowing what was coming, even having seen her minutes earlier, I felt my breath catch as Emma appeared. She was luminous. The ivory silk of her dress seemed to glow in the afternoon light streaming through the stained glass windows. Her veil flowed behind her like water, and her bouquet trembled slightly in her hands, the only sign of nerves in an otherwise perfect presentation. Dad walked beside her, his arm linked through hers, his face a mask of paternal pride and barely contained emotion. The guests rose as one, a rustling wave of silk and wool and admiration. I heard someone whisper, "She's so beautiful," and someone else murmur, "They're perfect together." The photographer moved discreetly along the side of the room, capturing every angle of Emma's radiant progress toward her future. But I was watching David. His face transformed as he saw her coming down the aisle. The nervous tension melted away, replaced by something that looked like wonder. His lips curved into a smile that was soft and private and full of promise. This was the face of a man in love, and for a moment, the knife in my chest twisted deeper, because I remembered when he had looked at me that way. Emma had been 20 minutes late to Maya's party, as usual. She'd called ahead to say she was coming, having driven down from Hartford where she was finishing her senior year at Trinity College. Maya had been talking about her roommate's gorgeous sister for months, and half the guys at the party were there specifically hoping to meet her. David and I had been sitting on Maya's narrow dorm bed, looking through a book of architectural photography he'd brought. Our knees were touching, and every few minutes his hand would brush mine as he turned the pages. The small contact sent electricity up my arm each time. "This is the Fallingwater House," he was saying, pointing to a photograph of a modernist masterpiece built over a waterfall. "Frank Lloyd Wright designed it to work with the landscape instead of fighting against it. See how the house doesn't just sit on the land. It grows out of it. It's beautiful," I said, but I was looking at his face as he spoke, watching the passion light up his features. "You really love this, don't you? Architecture, I mean." "I love the idea that you can create something that changes how people live, how they move through space, how they feel when they wake up in the morning." He turned to look at me. "Does that sound crazy?" "No," I said softly. "It sounds like poetry." He was leaning closer, and I really thought he was going to kiss me right there on Maya's narrow bed, surrounded by the sounds of the party. His eyes dropped to my lips, and I felt my heart hammering against my ribs. And then Emma walked in. She didn't make an entrance so much as she transformed the room simply by existing in it. Conversations paused mid-sentence. Music seemed to play more sweetly. Even the lighting seemed to adjust itself to better showcase her presence. She wore a simple black dress and knee-high boots, her blonde hair falling in waves over one shoulder. But it wasn't her clothes or her hair that drew every eye in the room. It was the way she moved, like she was floating just slightly above the ground, like gravity was merely a suggestion she chose to follow. "Sorry I'm late," she called out, and her voice was like music too, warm and bright and impossible to ignore. Traffic was absolutely murder coming down from Hartford. Maya rushed over to embrace her, and within seconds Emma was surrounded by introductions and admirations and that particular energy that always followed in her wake. "Who's that?" David asked, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "My sister," I said. "Your sister?" He sounded surprised, and I didn't blame him. People were always surprised to learn that Emma and I were related. Where she was sunshine, I was moonlight. Where she was the melody, I was the harmony. "Emma," I called out, raising my voice to carry across the room. "Come meet David." She turned, her eyes finding mine across the crowded space, and her face lit up with genuine joy. Whatever else had grown complicated between us over the years, Emma had never been anything but loving when it came to my rare romantic interests. She practically floated over to where we sat. "You must be the architect Clara's been telling me about," she said, extending her hand to David with that smile that had been breaking hearts since middle school. "I'm Emma, the slightly older and significantly more embarrassing sister." David stood to shake her hand, and I watched something shift in his expression. It was subtle, a slight widening of his eyes, a barely perceptible straightening of his shoulders, the way his smile became just a fraction brighter. "It's a pleasure to meet you," he said, and his voice carried a warmth that made my chest tighten. "Clara tells me you design houses for rich people," Emma said with a laugh. "That sounds like the most glamorous job in the world." "It's really not that glamorous," David replied, but he was smiling as he said it. "Mostly it involves a lot of arguing with contractors and explaining to clients why their 17-car garage might be just a tiny bit excessive." Emma laughed, really laughed, throwing her head back in that unself-conscious way that made everyone around her want to join in. 17 cars? What are they preparing for, the apocalypse? "That's what I asked," David said, and I could hear something new in his voice. Something lighter, more animated. The way people sounded when they were trying to impress someone. I sat on Maya's bed, watching this exchange with growing dread. It was like watching a car accident in slow motion, terrible and inevitable and impossible to stop. Emma wasn't trying to steal anything from me. She never tried. She didn't need to. She simply existed, and the world rearranged itself around her. "Clara, your sister is hilarious," David said, turning back to me, but his eyes kept drifting back to Emma. The party continued around us, but I felt like I was watching it through glass. David and Emma fell into easy conversation about travel, about college, about movies and music, and all the small discoveries that draw two people together. I contributed when I could, but increasingly I felt like a translator, helping two people understand each other in a language I was no longer sure I spoke. When David left that night, he hugged me goodbye, a friendly, casual embrace that felt nothing like the electric moment we'd shared on Maya's bed. "Your sister is amazing," he said as he pulled away. "You're lucky to have each other." "Yes," I said. "Lucky." He called Emma the next day. Dad reached the altar and performed the traditional handoff, placing Emma's hand in David's with the kind of ceremony that spoke to 30 years of dreaming about this moment. Emma's eyes were bright with unshed tears as she looked up at her almost husband, and David's smile was soft and private and full of promise. The officiant, Reverend Matthews, who had baptized both Emma and me, cleared his throat and began the familiar words. "Dearly beloved, we are gathered here today to join Emma Rose Hartwell and David Alexander Morrison in holy matrimony." I stood in my designated spot, holding Emma's bouquet, watching the ceremony unfold with the strange detachment of someone observing their own life from the outside. The afternoon sun slanted through the windows, casting colored light across the assembled guests. Everything looked like a painting, beautiful, composed, perfect. "Marriage is a sacred bond," Reverend Matthews continued, his voice carrying easily through the hushed room. "It is not to be entered into lightly, but with reverence, honor, and the full understanding that you are promising to love, cherish, and protect each other for all the days of your lives." Emma and David gazed at each other with the kind of intensity that made the rest of the world seem to fade away. I had seen them look at each other this way countless times over the past 3 years, at family dinners, at holidays, at the engagement party where I had smiled and applauded and pretended my heart wasn't breaking just a little bit more. "The couple has written their own vows," Reverend Matthews announced. "David, would you like to begin?" David reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. His hands were steady as he unfolded it, his voice clear and confident as he began to speak. "Emma," he said, and her name on his lips still made something inside me flinch. 3 years ago, I thought I knew what love was. I thought it was comfortable and predictable and safe. And then I met you, and you turned my whole world upside down." Soft laughter rippled through the congregation. Emma's smile was radiant. "You are sunshine and music, and everything bright in this world," David continued. "You make everyone around you feel like they're the most important person in the room. You have this gift, this incredible ability to see the best in people, to make them believe in themselves, to make ordinary moments feel magical." I felt something crack inside my chest, because those words, they weren't wrong. That was exactly who Emma was. She did have that gift. She did make everything brighter just by being present. And I had always known that about her, even when it meant living in her shadow. "I promise to love you with everything I have," David went on, his voice growing stronger, more emotional. "I promise to support your dreams, to laugh at your terrible jokes, to hold you when you cry, to celebrate every moment of joy. I promise to choose you every day for the rest of my life. Emma, you are my heart, my home, my future. I can't imagine my world without." He stopped mid-sentence. His face went pale. And then, in a voice that carried clearly through the suddenly silent room, he said, "Clara." The name hung in the air like a physical presence. 200 people sat in stunned silence, processing what they'd just heard. Emma's face went through a series of expressions: confusion, disbelief, dawning understanding, and finally, devastation. "I'm sorry," David said quickly, his face flushing red. "I meant Emma. Emma, I can't imagine my world without Emma." But it was too late. The damage was done. The spell was broken. And in that moment of shattering silence, something inside me finally snapped. I had been quiet for 28 years. I had been the good daughter, the supportive sister, the understanding friend. I had swallowed my words and my dreams and my truth to keep the peace, to avoid making waves, to preserve the careful balance of our family dynamics. But standing there in my burgundy dress, holding my sister's bouquet while she stared at her fiancé in horror, I realized that silence had cost me everything. "Actually," I said, my voice cutting through the silence like a blade, "I think we should talk about that." Every head in the room turned toward me. Emma's eyes widened in shock. David went even paler. Reverend Matthews looked like he might faint. "Clara," Emma whispered, "what are you doing?" I set her bouquet down on the small table beside the altar and took a step forward. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but my voice was steady. "I'm telling the truth," I said, "something I should have done a long time ago." "This isn't the time or place," David started, but I cut him off with a look. "When would be the right time, David?" I asked. "When would be the appropriate moment to mention that you and I dated for 6 weeks before you met my sister? When would be the correct venue to discuss the fact that you told me I was different, that I saw the world in ways other people missed, that you'd never met anyone who could make literary theory sound like poetry?" The collective gasp from the congregation was audible. Emma took a step backward, her hand flying to her throat. "Clara, please," she whispered, but I was beyond stopping now. "When would be the right time to mention that you kissed me first?" I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. That you called me every morning and sent me pictures of buildings you thought I'd find interesting. That you told me I was dangerous because I made you feel things you didn't expect to feel. The calls stopped after Emma's visit. Not all at once, that would have been too obvious, too cruel. Instead, they tapered off gradually. The good morning texts became sporadic. The evening phone calls grew shorter. The weekend plans became more tentative, then disappeared altogether. I told myself I was imagining things, that David was busy with work, that I was being paranoid and insecure and all the things that quiet girls were supposed to be. But then Emma called me, 3 weeks after the party, her voice bubbling with excitement. "Clara, you'll never guess what happened. Remember that architect you introduced me to at Maya's party? David? Well, he asked me out." The phone felt heavy in my hand. "He what?" "He called me yesterday and asked if I wanted to have dinner with him this weekend. Isn't that amazing? I mean, I know you two were just friends, but I wanted to check with you first. You don't mind, do you? I mean, it's not like you were dating him or anything." "Just friends." The words hit me like a physical blow. "Clara, are you there?" "I'm here," I managed. "So it's okay? You don't mind?" What could I say? That I did mind? That I'd been falling in love with him? That every morning for the past month I'd woken up thinking about him, and every evening I'd fallen asleep with his voice still echoing in my ears? How could I explain that we had been more than friends without sounding pathetic, without seeming like I was making something out of nothing? David had obviously told Emma that we were just friends, which meant that whatever I'd thought was building between us had been entirely in my imagination. "No," I said finally. "I don't mind." "Oh, thank God. I was so worried you'd be upset. But I knew you'd understand, you always do. You're the best sister in the world, Clara. I love you so much." After I hung up, I sat on my dorm room bed and stared at the book of architectural photography David had left behind. I flipped to the page showing Falling Water, the house that grew out of the landscape instead of fighting against it. I had been fighting against the landscape of my own life for weeks, trying to convince myself I could be the kind of girl who captured and kept someone's attention. But looking at that photograph, I understood something fundamental about the world and my place in it. Some people were meant to be the house magnificent, central, impossible to ignore. Others were meant to be the landscape beautiful in their own way, but ultimately there to make the house look better. I had always been the landscape. Emma had always been the house, and David, it seemed, knew the difference. "Clara, stop," Emma said, tears streaming down her face now. "Please, just stop." But I couldn't stop. 3 years of silence had built up like water behind a dam, and now that the dam had burst, there was no controlling the flood. "I stopped calling him," I continued, addressing the room now rather than just Emma and David. "I stepped aside because that's what good sisters do, right? That's what quiet, understanding Clara always does." I convinced myself that I had imagined the connection between us, that I had misread the signs, that I was just another girl with a foolish crush who couldn't accept reality. David's face was ashen. "Clara, you don't understand." "What don't I understand, David?" I turned to face him fully. "Help me understand. Explain to me how you went from telling me I was the most fascinating person you'd ever met to asking my sister out 3 weeks later. Help me understand how someone goes from kissing me like I was the answer to a question they'd been asking their whole life to forgetting I existed entirely." The silence in the room was deafening. I could see people leaning forward in their chairs, straining to catch every word. This was better than any soap opera, more dramatic than any movie. This was real life imploding in real time. Emma sank into a chair someone had quickly brought forward, her wedding dress pooling around her like spilled cream. She was sobbing now, great heaving sobs that shook her shoulders. "I never meant for this to happen," David said, his voice barely above a whisper. "Which part?" I asked. "The part where you made me believe I mattered to you, or the part where you decided I didn't?" He opened his mouth to respond, but I wasn't finished. "Do you want to know what the worst part was?" I asked, my voice carrying clearly through the silent room. It wasn't losing you. It was losing myself. It was spending 3 years watching you two together, smiling at family dinners, playing the supportive sister at your engagement party, agreeing to be maid of honor at your wedding, all while pretending that none of it hurt, all while convincing myself that I was noble and selfless and mature. I looked out at the sea of shocked faces, at cousins and family friends and strangers who had come to witness a celebration and were instead watching a reckoning. But I wasn't any of those things, I continued. I was a coward. I was so afraid of making waves, so desperate to maintain the peace, that I erased my own feelings. I made myself smaller and smaller until I practically disappeared. And for what? So everyone could go on believing in the fairy tale? Emma looked up at me through her tears. Clara, I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. I know you didn't, I said, and my voice softened for the first time since I'd started speaking. That's not your fault, Emma. You never had to know because I never told you. Because I never told anyone. Because I was so used to being the sister who didn't matter that I convinced myself my feelings didn't matter either. I took a deep breath, feeling lighter with each word I spoke. The truth was heavy, but carrying it in silence had been heavier. You want to know what love is, David? I asked, turning back to him. Love isn't comfortable and predictable and safe. Love is brave. Love is honest. Love is showing up for someone even when it's hard, even when it hurts, even when it means risking everything. I gestured toward Emma, who was still crying silently in her chair. Emma loves you with her whole heart. She has given you everything. Her trust, her future, her dreams. She deserves someone who loves her the same way, someone who doesn't call out another woman's name at the altar, someone who doesn't carry the ghost of someone else into their marriage. David's face crumpled. Clara, You what? I asked. You're sorry? You made a mistake? You chose wrong 3 years ago and you've been trying to convince yourself ever since that you chose right? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. The answer was written across his face. I looked out at the congregation one last time, at my parents, whose faces showed a mixture of shock and dawning understanding, at David's family, who looked like they wanted to sink through the floor, at friends and relatives who would be talking about this day for years to come. I'm not telling you this to ruin anyone's wedding, I said. I'm telling you this because I'm tired of living a lie. I'm tired of pretending that silence is the same thing as grace. I'm tired of making myself small so everyone else can feel comfortable. I walked over to where Emma sat and knelt down beside her chair, taking her hands in mine. Em, I said softly, using the nickname I'd called her since we were children. You are the most beautiful, generous, loving person I know. You deserve someone who chooses you first, every time, without hesitation. You deserve someone who doesn't have to convince himself to love you because he's too busy actually loving you to question it. She looked at me through her tears, and for a moment, we were children again. 2 little girls who shared secrets and dreams and an unbreakable bond that had somehow gotten tangled up in silence and assumptions and the complicated mathematics of the heart. What do I do now? She whispered. You choose yourself, I said. For once in your life, Em, choose yourself first. I stood up and looked back at David one more time. He was staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read, regret maybe, or recognition, or the dawning awareness of what he had given up. Goodbye, David, I said. I hope you find what you're looking for someday. I hope you find someone who makes you brave enough to love them without reservation, without doubt, without looking back. I walked back to the altar, picked up my bouquet, and headed for the side exit. My parents started to rise, but I shook my head. This wasn't about them. This wasn't about anyone but me. As I reached the door, I heard Emma's voice behind me. Clara, wait. I turned back. She was standing now, her wedding dress wrinkled, her makeup streaked, but her voice steady. Thank you, she said, for finally telling me the truth. I smiled, really smiled, for the first time in 3 years. Thank you for listening, I said. And then I walked out of Rosewood Manor, out of the fairy tale, and into the rest of my life. I drove for hours afterward, letting the highway carry me away from the wreckage of the day. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I didn't feel the urge to pull over and fall apart on the side of the road. Instead, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. My phone buzzed with text messages from my parents, from Maya, from cousins and friends who had witnessed the implosion. But I didn't read them. Not yet. There would be time for explanations and conversations and the messy work of rebuilding relationships. There would be time to help Emma heal, to figure out what came next for both of us. But right now, driving through the golden light of late afternoon with the windows down and the radio playing, I just wanted to feel what it was like to be myself again. To exist without apology, without explanation, without the constant weight of unspoken truth pressing against my chest. I thought about David, probably still standing at that altar, trying to process what had just happened. I thought about Emma, hopefully realizing that she deserved better than someone who said another woman's name on their wedding day. I thought about my parents, who would eventually understand that their quiet daughter had finally found her voice. But mostly, I thought about the future. About the woman I could become now that I wasn't hiding anymore. About the stories I could tell, the dreams I could chase, the love I might find with someone who wouldn't have to choose between me and anyone else. The sun was setting by the time I reached my apartment, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. I climbed the stairs to my door, kicked off my heels, and poured myself a glass of wine. Then I sat on my couch, still in my burgundy maid of honor dress, and finally allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I had done. I had blown up my sister's wedding. I had aired our family's private business in front of 200 people. I had probably caused irreparable damage to relationships that had taken a lifetime to build, and I regretted none of it, because for the first time in 3 years, maybe for the first time in my life, I had chosen myself. I had refused to disappear. I had claimed my place in the story instead of watching from the sidelines. My phone rang. Emma's name appeared on the screen. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Hi," I said. "Hi." Her voice was hoarse from crying, but steady. "I called off the wedding." "Good." David tried to explain, tried to say it was just nerves, that he misspoke, but I could see it in his eyes, Clara. I could see what you were talking about. I closed my eyes. "I'm sorry, Em. I'm sorry it had to happen that way." "Are you?" she asked. "Are you really sorry?" I thought about it. "I'm sorry it hurt you. I'm sorry it was public. I'm sorry it had to happen on what was supposed to be the happiest day of your life, but I'm not sorry I finally told the truth." There was a long pause. Then Emma said, "I've been thinking about that night at Maya's party. I remember now the way you looked when I walked in, the way David looked at me. I was so caught up in the excitement of meeting someone new that I didn't see what was right in front of me." "Emma, no, let me finish. I've spent my whole life having things come easily to me. Friends, boyfriends, attention. It all just seemed to fall into my lap without me having to try very hard. I never thought about what that meant for you. I never thought about what it cost you to always be the one who stepped aside." I could hear her crying again, but quietly now, the kind of tears that come with understanding rather than shock. "I should have asked," she continued. "When David called me that first time, I should have asked if there was something between you two. I should have seen the signs. I should have been a better sister." "You were being yourself," I said. "That's all you've ever done wrong, being exactly who you are. But that's not enough anymore, is it? Being myself isn't enough if it means I'm blind to everyone else." We sat in silence for a moment, the weight of 3 years of unspoken truths settling between us. "What happens now?" Emma asked. "I don't know," I admitted. "I guess we figure it out as we go." "Are we going to be okay? You and me?" I looked out my apartment window at the city lights beginning to twinkle in the gathering darkness. "I think we might be better than okay. For the first time." After we hung up, I sat in the quiet of my apartment, still in my bridesmaid dress, and thought about the woman I had been that morning, and the woman I was now. They felt like different people entirely. My phone buzzed with a text from Maya. Holy shit, Clara. I just heard. Are you okay? Then another from my mother. Sweetheart, please call us when you're ready. We love you. And another from a college friend. Just saw Emma's Instagram. Wedding canceled? What happened? I turned off my phone and ran a bath. As I sank into the hot water, I thought about David's face when I'd walked away from the altar. There had been something in his expression that looked almost like relief, as if I had said the words he'd been unable to say himself. Maybe that was the real tragedy, not that he had chosen Emma over me, but that he had never really chosen either of us. He had let circumstances choose for him, let the easier path become the only path, let the story write itself instead of taking responsibility for the pen. But I was done letting other people write my story. I was done being a supporting character in my own life. The next morning, I woke up to find 17 missed calls and 43 text messages. The story had spread beyond our immediate circle, the way dramatic stories always do. Emma's friends were reaching out with sympathy. David's friends were reaching out with curiosity. My parents wanted to talk. Maya wanted details. But the message that mattered most was from Emma. Coffee? I'm buying. We met at the little cafe near my apartment where I'd had my first date with David 4 years earlier. Emma looked different, older somehow, more fragile, but also more present than I'd seen her in years. She wore jeans and a simple sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail, no makeup to hide the evidence of yesterday's tears. I returned the dress this morning, she said as I sat down across from her, and canceled the honeymoon. Turns out you can get a full refund if the groom calls out another woman's name at the altar. Despite everything, I laughed. Emma, it's okay, she said. I need to be able to laugh about it, or I'll never stop crying. She ordered us both coffee and pastries, falling back into the familiar rhythm of taking care of everyone around her, but there was something different about it now, less automatic. More intentional. I've been thinking all night, she said, about us, about who we've been to each other and who we could be. What do you mean? I mean, I've been the golden child for so long that I forgot you were gold too. Different gold, maybe quieter, deeper, but gold all the same. She reached across the table and took my hands. I want to know you, Clara, really know you. Not just the version of you that makes everyone else comfortable. I felt tears prick at my eyes. I'd like that too. Tell me about David, she said. Tell me about those 6 weeks. I want to understand what I took from you. So I did. I told her about the gallery opening, about the late-night phone calls, about the way he made me feel like I was finally the protagonist of my own story. I told her about the night at Maya's party, about watching him fall for her in real time, about the slow agony of stepping aside. Why didn't you tell me? She asked when I finished. Because I was ashamed, I said. Because I thought if I admitted how much it hurt, it would mean I was petty and jealous and small. Because I thought good sisters were supposed to be happy for each other, no matter what. Good sisters are supposed to be honest with each other, Emma said firmly. Everything else is just performance. We talked for 3 hours, filling in the gaps that silence had created between us. Emma told me about her relationship with David, how sweet he was, how attentive, but how she sometimes felt like he was holding something back, how there were moments when his attention seemed to drift, when he seemed to be looking for something she couldn't provide. I thought it was just typical guy stuff, she said. Fear of commitment or whatever. I never imagined it was because his heart was somewhere else. Was it? I asked. His heart, I mean. Was it really somewhere else, or am I just making that up to make myself feel better? Emma was quiet for a long moment. Yesterday, after you left, he tried to salvage things. He said it was just nerves, that he'd been thinking about your speech and misspoke, but when I asked him directly, when I asked him if he had feelings for you, he couldn't say no. The words hit me like a physical blow, but not in the way I expected. Instead of vindication or satisfaction, I felt only sadness for all of us, for the years we'd wasted on a love triangle where no one got what they really wanted. What did he say? I asked. He said he cared about you, that he always had. He said he chose me, but Emma shrugged. Choosing someone isn't the same as wanting them most, is it? We finished our coffee in comfortable silence, both of us processing the wreckage of the previous day and the possibility of what came next. "I have a confession," Emma said as we prepared to leave. "What?" Part of me is relieved. Not about the public humiliation or the wasted money or breaking Dad's heart, but about not marrying David. She looked at me with something like wonder. "I don't think I was in love with him either, Clara. I think I was in love with the idea of him, with the story we made together. But when I try to imagine growing old with him, having kids with him, building a life with him, I can't see it, not clearly." "What can you see?" I asked. She smiled, and for the first time in years, it looked completely genuine. "I can see myself figuring it out as I go. I can see myself being alone for a while, maybe for the first time in my adult life. I can see myself learning who I am when I'm not trying to be someone's perfect girlfriend or wife." "That sounds terrifying," I said. "It sounds like freedom," she replied. As we walked back to our cars, Emma linked her arm through mine the way she used to when we were children. "Clara?" she said. "Yeah? Thank you for saving me from marrying the wrong person. Thank you for not hating me for it." "Never," she said firmly. "We're sisters. We're supposed to save each other." 3 months later, I got a promotion at the publishing house where I worked. 6 months later, Emma started graduate school in social work. A year later, we took a trip to Europe together, just the two of us, no boyfriends or agendas or carefully managed family dynamics. I never heard from David directly, though the rumor mill eventually carried news that he had left town, taken a job with a firm in Seattle. Emma ran into him once, at a coffee shop downtown, and said he looked older, sadder, like someone carrying the weight of poor choices. "Did he ask about me?" I had asked, hating myself for caring. "He asked if you were happy," Emma said. "I told him you were becoming happy, which seemed more accurate." She was right. I was becoming happy not in the instant, dramatic way of romantic comedies, but in the slow, deliberate way of someone learning to build a life that actually belonged to them. I started writing again, something I'd abandoned in college when it seemed too impractical, too self-indulgent. I joined a book club, took a pottery class, learned to say no to things I didn't want to do, and yes to things that scared me. Most importantly, I learned the difference between being quiet and being silent. Being quiet was a choice, a way of moving through the world with intention and observation. Being silent was a cage I had built for myself out of fear and obligation, and the mistaken belief that taking up space was somehow selfish. Emma and I became real friends for the first time in our adult lives. Not perfect friends. We still had our patterns, our old hurts, our moments of falling back into familiar roles. But we were honest friends, authentic friends, the kind of friends who could tell each other hard truths and trust that love would survive the telling. 2 years after the wedding that never was, I met someone. His name was Michael, and he was nothing like David Shorter, quieter, a librarian who collected vintage books and made terrible puns and looked at me like I was exactly who he'd been hoping to find. The first time he kissed me, I didn't think about anyone else. The first time he told me he loved me, I believed him completely. The first time he asked me to marry him, I said yes without hesitation. Emma was my maid of honor, of course. She stood beside me at the altar in a dress we'd chosen together, holding my bouquet while I promised to love and honor and cherish the man who had chosen me first, completely without reservation. During the reception, as Michael and I danced to our first song as a married couple, I caught sight of Emma at our family table, laughing at something our cousin had said. She was dating someone new, a kind, funny social worker named James who seemed to understand that loving Emma meant loving her completely, not just the shiny parts everyone else saw. For a moment, our eyes met across the dance floor, and we smiled at each other with the complicated, grateful love of sisters who had finally learned to tell each other the truth. Later that night, as Michael and I drove away from our reception toward our honeymoon, I thought about that afternoon 4 years earlier when I had blown up Emma's wedding. I thought about the woman who had stood at that altar in her burgundy dress, finally finding her voice after years of silence. I was proud of her courage, proud of her honesty, proud of her refusal to disappear. Because sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to make yourself small. Sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the truth, even when it hurts. Sometimes the only way to save a relationship is to risk destroying it entirely. I had risked everything that day, my family, my sister, my carefully constructed image as the good, quiet daughter who never caused problems. I had chosen authenticity over peace, truth over comfort, my own voice over everyone else's expectations. It had been the scariest thing I'd ever done. It had also been the most necessary. And as we drove through the night toward whatever came next, I realized that I would make the same choice again, in a heartbeat. Because the alternative, a lifetime of silence, of swallowed words, of being a supporting character in my own story was no choice at all. Some people are meant to be the house, magnificent and impossible to ignore, but others are meant to be the voice that insists the house be built on solid ground. I had finally learned the difference, and I had finally learned which one I was meant to be.